My daughter-in-law, Dawn, snatched the ladle, struck me on the head, and screamed, "Who cooks like that?" Hot soup ran down my temple, but what froze me was the TV in the living room suddenly turning up loud. The heat of the metal and the soup was scalding on my scalp, but it was nothing compared to the ice-cold chill that just ran down my spine. That wasn't just the TV. That was the sound of the truth. Hello, everyone. My name is Eliza, and I'm 71 years old. This is my story. When you get to be this age, sometimes you just want someone to listen. If you're here with me, please press like and maybe let me know what city you're listening from. It's nice to know I'm not alone. This really started 6 months after my husband, Henry, passed away. It was tough. I know you all understand that feeling, the way inflation has skyrocketed these past few years. My Social Security check and our little bit of savings just seemed to shrink every month. The power bill, the gas for the car, even the price of a dozen eggs at Kroger, everything was climbing so fast. When Robert, my only son, suggested I move in with him and his wife, Dawn, I thought it was a blessing. I thought I'd be with a family. I was so wrong. I sold almost everything I owned. I just kept a few suitcases and a box of Henry's mementos. But the second I walked into their apartment, I knew I wasn't Mom moving in. I was a burden. They put me in the tiny spare room at the end of the hall, the one Robert used as an office, overlooking a noisy brick alley. Dawn never called me Mom. She always called me Eliza. Her voice had this sharp edge to it that always made me flinch. I tried. I swear to you, I tried. I'd get up before both of them and make a fresh pot of coffee. Dawn would taste it, make a face, and dump it right down the sink, saying it was weak as dishwater. The next day, I made it stronger. She said it tasted burnt. I tried to make breakfast, but the eggs were too salty. Very quickly, I learned the new rule for survival: make myself invisible. I just stayed in my room reading my old books. I felt like a stranger, an unwelcome guest who had overstayed her welcome in my own son's home. That day, I broke my invisible rule. Robert had seemed so stressed from work, and I remembered how much he used to love my chicken soup. Just a simple soup. I'd gone to the store, bought the celery, the carrots, and a whole chicken. I let the broth simmer for hours. The smell made the apartment feel a little warmer. I was tasting it one last time, just adjusting the salt, when Dawn stormed into the kitchen. She had just gotten home from work. She looked at the pot and just sneered. "What is that slop you're making?" I was stunned. I stammered, "It's just soup for Robert." And that's when she did it. She didn't say another word. She just snatched the metal ladle from my hand, the one still hot from the soup, and struck me right across the side of my head. "Who cooks like that?" I screamed. It was part pain, part shock. I could feel the hot soup and something warmer, blood running down my temple, but the physical pain was drowned out instantly, because from the living room, where Robert was sitting watching TV, I heard my scream, and then the sound of the football commentator suddenly got twice as loud. He turned the volume up. He had heard, and he chose to turn up the TV. I didn't scream back. I didn't even cry. I just turned, my hands shaking, and walked down the hall to my little room and quietly shut the door. I could hear a bathroom door slam and the sound of Dawn muttering something angry. And then, underneath it all, that constant cheerful commentary from the football game. My son's noise, his choice not to hear. I sat on the edge of my bed, the narrow one pushed against the wall overlooking that dark alley. I just stared at my palms, still a little sticky with chicken soup. I had been so looking forward to him tasting it. I pictured him smiling, saying, "This is great, Mom." An illusion. I put a hand up to my temple where the hot ladle had hit. The skin was starting to sting, to throb. I went into my small bathroom, ran an old washcloth under cold water, and gently dabbed at the dried blood and soup. Looking in the mirror, I saw a 71-year-old woman, hair a mess, eyes red. I wondered, how? How did it ever come to this? My eyes landed on the old photo of Henry, my husband, on the nightstand. "Oh, Henry," I whispered. He always saw Robert a little more clearly than I did. I, on the other hand, had always chosen not to look. I remembered, clear as day, a moment. Oh, it must have been 15 years ago, right in the middle of that 2008 recession. Robert and Dawn had been living so far beyond their means, borrowing too much. This very apartment they were in, they were about to lose it. Robert had called us, sobbing on the phone. Henry and I weren't wealthy, but we cashed in $50,000 of our retirement savings. $50,000 to save this home for him. I can still feel Robert hugging me at the lawyer's office, telling me I was the greatest mom in the world. Dawn had been so sweet too, promising they would take care of us when we were old. That promise, it vanished just as quickly as the money did. We had sacrificed our own security, our own cushion for old age, for them. I found myself wondering, if Henry were still alive, would he have let this happen? Or did he know, somehow, that this was a fight I would have to face on my own? The truth is, it was always a pattern. When he was little, Robert only hugged me when he wanted a new toy. When he got older, he only called when he needed money for college or for his car. And after he married, he and Dawn were only kind when they wanted us to pay for a vacation or some expensive piece of furniture they saw on HGTV. Their love always had a price tag, and I, foolishly, had always paid. I thought that when Henry died, when I moved in here, I would finally get some care. But I was just a penniless ATM, an unpaid maid. The pain on my temple didn't matter anymore. There was a different, deeper ache rising up. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was a cold, clear rage. I had spent my entire life loving someone who, I was just now realizing, had never actually loved me back. "Enough," I whispered to the woman in the mirror. "This is more than enough." I hardly slept that night, but when the sun started to just skim the edge of that alley window, for the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid. I felt empty, but in a good way, like a glass that had just been washed clean. I heard the coffee maker hiss in the kitchen. That was the signal. Normally, I would have rushed out, hoping to make a cup that Dawn would approve of, hoping for a single nod from Robert. But this morning, I just sat still. I heard Dawn call, "Eliza." I didn't answer. I heard her footsteps, irritated, and then Robert whispering something. I stood up. I put on my best coat, the one Henry always liked, and I grabbed my wallet and my old phone. I walked out of my room. They were both in the kitchen, and they turned to look at me, their faces a mix of surprise and annoyance. Dawn opened her mouth to say something, but I just walked right past them, as if they were air, and I opened the front door and stepped outside. The click of the lock as I pulled the door shut behind me was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was just the beginning of fall, and the morning air was crisp. I had forgotten what this felt like. Living in that apartment was like being in a stale box, smelling only of bleach and tension. But now I could smell damp leaves and the scent of toast from a nearby bakery. I just walked. I had no destination. I was just moving. I walked past the park, watching the children play, watching people walk their dogs. I saw a small coffee shop on the corner. Instead of going home to make dishwater, I walked in. I ordered a large latte and an almond croissant. I sat by the window, watching the people go by, and I slowly enjoyed it. You know, I realized it was the first time in over a year I had bought something just for myself. The coffee was hot and sweet, and it tasted like freedom. I had forgotten I was a person, one who deserved small, nice things. I sat there by myself, and I didn't feel lonely at all. I sat there for a long time, just letting the warmth of the coffee sink in. I opened my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Most were doctors or old friends of Henry's I hadn't spoken to. But then I saw a name. Brenda. Brenda was my best friend from high school. We had lost touch after she moved down to Florida. I just stared at the name. I hadn't called anyone just to talk in so many years. What was I afraid of? They couldn't hurt me anymore. I took a deep breath and I pressed the call button. It rang 3 times, and then a sleepy but familiar voice came on. Eliza, is that you? I just burst into tears. Not tears of sadness, but of relief. Oh my goodness, Brenda, I said, it's me. I need a friend. We talked for an hour, right there at that cafe table. I didn't tell her everything, just that I was having a hard time. But hearing her voice, knowing there was someone in the world who was genuinely happy to hear from me, it planted a small seed, a seed of hope. I realized that day that I still had a life left to live. I didn't go back home that night. I didn't go home the next night either. I used what little cash I had left to get a cheap motel room by the day, the kind you find just off the highway. It wasn't much, but it was quiet. And most importantly, it was safe. I spent that time calling Brenda again, and she just listened. She didn't judge. She just said, Eliza, you deserve so much better. I started to get my thoughts in order. I ate at cheap diners, walked in the park, and for the first time, I started looking up on my phone if there was any kind of help out there for seniors in my situation. I was still scared, but the fear wasn't paralyzing me anymore. It was being replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I knew I couldn't go back there. I just didn't know where I was going next. I had turned the ringer off on my phone, but I left it on vibrate. And on the 3rd day, it started buzzing, and it just wouldn't stop. I looked at the screen. Robert! My heart just dropped into my stomach. Every cell in my body was screaming, don't answer. It's a trap. But another part, that stupid, foolish part that was still a mother, whispered, what if he's sorry? Finally, I took a deep breath and I picked up. I didn't say anything. Mom? Mom! Oh my God! Where are you? Are you okay? Robert's voice came spilling out, just full of fake worry. It was so sweet it was sickening. We've been worried sick. Dawn's been crying. We've called you 100 times. Please come home, Mom. I was quiet for a long moment. I could hear faint pop music in the background. Dawn was no doubt sitting right next to him, coaching him on what to say. "Dawn's been crying?" I asked. My voice sounded strange to me, flat, with no emotion in it at all. "Yes, yes," Robert said, way too quickly. "She feels just terrible about that misunderstanding the other day. She misses you so much." And then, after all the sugar, came the real reason. "But Mom," his voice shifted into that whining victim tone, we're really in a bit of trouble." I still said nothing. "You know, the electric bill this month, it's just so high, and Dawn's car needs a repair. We're a little tight." He paused, waiting for me to say the line I always said. "How much do you need?" But I didn't. I just thought about the scar forming on my temple and the sound of that football game. "Mom?" Robert asked, and the sweetness was starting to crack, replaced by a little irritation. "Did you hear me? We just need a little support, like always, just to get through the month." "Like always," I repeated. "Yeah, you know, you've always been there for me," he said, trying to pull on that old guilt. Something inside me just clicked into place. The anxiety, the nervousness, it all just evaporated, and all that was left was steel. "Robert," I said, my voice still flat, "I can't help you." There was a dead silence on the line. I could actually hear Dawn's angry, muffled whisper in the background. "What? What do you mean?" Robert stammered. "Of course you can. You just need to—" "I said—" I cut him off, and this time there was a little bit of that steel in my voice. "I can't help you. I'm busy taking care of myself." "But, Mom," he almost shrieked it, "after everything we've done for you—" I didn't want to hear any more. I didn't want to hear him list the roof over my head that I had paid for with my dignity. I simply ended the call. I hung up. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was something else. It was power. I had said no, and the world hadn't ended. I sat there staring at the silent phone, and for the first time in decades, I felt a little bit of confidence. I had won. A small victory, but it was mine. 3 days in that cheap motel room gave me time to think, time to just sit and be. The walls were thin. I could hear other people's lives, a TV playing a game show, a couple arguing, a baby crying. It all just faded into the background. My mind was clearer than it had been in years. Robert's phone call had confirmed everything I had been too afraid to admit to myself. I wasn't his mother. I was a resource, a bank account, a cook, a maid. And now that I had said no, the resource was broken and he was angry. The feeling of strength from that phone call was still there, a small, hard kernel of coal in my stomach. But it came with a cold, hard dose of reality. Everything I had left in the world was still in that apartment. My clothes, a few pieces of cheap jewelry Henry had bought me at Sears, and most importantly, the small, dark wooden box. The box held the last pictures of Henry and me, a lock of his hair, his old army dog tags. It was all I had left of him. I couldn't leave Henry behind. I would not let them keep him from me. I decided I had to go back. I made a plan. I told myself I would be fast, in and out. I'd go in the middle of the day. I checked the clock, 1:30 p.m. They would both be at work. Surely they would be at work. I would use my key, sneak into my little room, that little prison cell, grab my suitcase and that wooden box, and I would be gone forever, vanished. before they even knew I had been there. The fear was still there, of course. It was a sick, churning feeling in my stomach as the city bus hissed to a stop at my old corner. Every step I took on that familiar sidewalk felt like walking through wet cement. But the determination to get that last piece of my husband, to save that last piece of myself, was stronger. I clutched my single set of keys in my pocket. My palm was so damp with sweat, I was afraid the key would slip right out of my hand. I stood in front of the apartment door. It looked just the same, number 3B. My heart was a hammer against my ribs, so loud I was sure someone in the next apartment could hear it. I pressed my ear to the cold wood, listening. Silence. Absolute, total silence. No TV, no music, no arguing. Good. They were at work, just as I planned. I took a deep, shuddering breath, pulled the key from my pocket, and slid it into the lock as gently as I possibly could. The sound of the tumblers clicking over seemed deafening in the quiet hallway. I turned the knob. The door opened without a sound. The apartment was silent, dark. Dusty afternoon light filtered through the closed blinds in the living room, cutting the air into bars of light and shadow. Everything was just as I'd left it. I could smell the faint, sour odor of burnt coffee and something else, the stale, metallic smell of their anger. I stood there, holding my breath. I tiptoed across the carpet, my shoes sinking into the plush fibers. I moved past the living room, toward the hallway that led to my room. Just a few more feet. My eyes were locked on the door at the end of the hall. Just get the suitcase, get the box, and go. I kept chanting it in my head, a desperate prayer. Faster, Eliza, faster, please God, faster. I had almost made it. My hand was out, my fingers just grazing the cool metal of the doorknob of my bedroom. And then I heard it, a cough, a dry, throaty sound, from the living room. I froze. Every muscle in my body turned to ice. My blood just stopped. I turned my head, slowly, mechanically. They were not at work. Robert and Dawn were sitting there, on the sofa, in the shadows of the curtained room. Both of them were in their bathrobes. They had been there the entire time, just sitting, in silence, waiting for me. It was an ambush. Dawn was the first one to stand up. She didn't move quickly. She uncoiled like a snake. Her face wasn't surprised. It was a mask of pure, settled, victorious rage. "You dare," she said, her voice a low hiss that just sliced through the silence. "You dare to show your face here again?" Robert stood up after her, a beat too late, like a puppet whose strings had just been pulled. He wouldn't look at me. He stared at the carpet. "Mom," he started, and his voice was dripping with a whining, childish reproach. "Where have you been? What were you thinking?" I was stunned. The sheer, bald-faced audacity of it. What was I thinking? "We've been worried sick," Robert said, his voice getting louder. He was working himself up, feeding off Dawn's anger. This was for her benefit. "You're gone for 3 days. 3 days, not a word. Do you have any idea how upset Dawn has been? Do you?" He finally looked at me, and his eyes weren't filled with worry. They were filled with irritation. You just had to cause trouble, didn't you? You just had to make a scene." Blame. They were blaming me. I, the one who had been hit with a hot ladle, the one whose scream had been ignored by her own son, the one who had fled for her own safety. I was now the troublemaker. I looked at Robert's face, his angry, cowardly, petulant face. He wasn't worried about me. He was angry that I had disrupted his comfort. He was angry that I had made Dawn upset. He was angry that his ATM had walked out of the bank. Worried? My voice was trembling, but not with fear. It was something else, something hot and acidic and volcanic, rising from deep in my chest. You were worried about me, Robert? Yes, he shouted, stepping toward me. You always have to make everything so dramatic. You just can't be normal. I didn't answer him. My eyes, my focus, drifted past his shoulder into the kitchen, and I saw it. There, in the stainless steel sink, caked with old congealed grease and dried, rotting vegetables. The chicken soup pot, the damn chicken soup pot I had poured my love, my hope into. And right next to it, resting on the counter, gleaming under the single, harsh light from the stove hood, was the metal ladle. That was it. The very last thread. The last frayed thread of the woman I used to be. The quiet, accommodating, invisible Eliza. It just snapped. Dramatic! I screamed. The sound that tore out of my throat, it startled even me. It wasn't my voice. It was the growl of an animal that had been cornered, poked, and starved for too long. You want to see dramatic? I lunged past him. I moved faster than I had in 20 years. I lunged for the kitchen. I wasn't thinking anymore. I was just doing. I was pure, raw, glorious action. I grabbed that filthy, heavy soup pot from the sink, and I didn't pause. I turned and I threw it with all my strength onto the tile floor. Filthy, cold soup and old food splattered up the walls, onto the white refrigerator, the cabinets. The sound of the heavy bottom pot crashing on the tile was a deafening, beautiful gong. Eliza! Dawn shrieked, her voice cracking. But I didn't stop. I yanked open the cabinet, the one where I had so carefully, so dutifully, stacked Dawn's pristine white porcelain plates every single day. I grabbed the first stack, the dinner plates. This is for your kindness. I hurled them at the floor. Smash! The sound was like a thunderclap. The porcelain shattered, spraying across the room. I grabbed the second stack, the salad plates. This is for your worry. Smash! Robert rushed at me, his hands out, his face pale with shock. Mom, stop! Stop it! You're crazy! You're completely crazy! Crazy? I shrieked, my eyes landing on the wineglass rack. I'll show you crazy. I swept my arm across it, a wide, powerful arc, and the entire set of expensive, long-stemmed wineglasses that Dawn loved so much flew from their hooks. They exploded, a symphony of shattering glass, tiny, glittering shards raining down on the counter and the floor. I grabbed cups. I grabbed bowls. I threw a sugar canister. I threw a blender. I pulled open a drawer and threw handfuls of silverware. I didn't care. I needed to break. I needed them to see what they had broken. The kitchen, the room where I had tried so hard to please them, to earn my keep, was now a war zone of broken glass, sticky wine, and rotting food. I stood there, in the middle of the wreckage, panting. My chest heaved. The silence that fell was more shocking than the noise. I could hear my own breathing, harsh and ragged. I could smell the sharp, sour tang of spilled wine and old soup. I looked down. My hand was wet, not with wine. It was blood. I had a long, deep gash across my palm from a shard of glass. I watched, detached, as a drop of my blood fell onto a piece of a broken white plate. Robert and Dawn were frozen in the kitchen doorway, their faces identical masks of pale, wide-eyed horror. They were staring, not at me, but at the destruction, at their beautiful, clean kitchen. Dawn was the first to recover. Her shock didn't turn to fear. It turned into a cold, icy, reptilian fury. She didn't look at me. She didn't spare me a single glance. She looked right at Robert. "Robert," she said, her voice a dangerous low hiss. I told you. I told you what would happen. I will not live in the same house with a crazy, violent old woman." Robert stammered, his eyes huge. He looked from Dawn to the kitchen to me. "Dawn, honey. She's just, she's upset." "No!" Dawn cut him off, her voice sharp as the glass on the floor. "Now! You have to choose. Right now." She took a step closer to him. "Either she leaves this house permanently, right now, or I do. And if I go," she poked a long, manicured finger hard into Robert's chest, you know, I'm taking everything." I looked at Robert. This was it. This was the moment of truth. His entire life, his marriage, his weakness, his cowardice, it all came down to this single second. My son, the boy I had raised. Who would he choose? I knew. Of course I knew. But I had to watch it. I had to see the final betrayal with my own eyes. Robert looked at me. His eyes were pleading, as if I was the one putting him in this impossible position, as if I was the one holding the knife. He looked at the shattered kitchen. He looked at Dawn's furious, set face, and then his eyes dropped to the floor. The final act of cowardice. He couldn't even look at me. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. You need to leave." My world just stopped. The sound of the broken glass, the screaming, my own ragged breathing. It all faded into a dull, humming roar. All I could hear were his words, echoing in the sudden, vast emptiness. "You need to leave." "Robert?" I asked. My voice was barely a whisper, a last, desperate, stupid flicker of hope. He lifted his head, and the shame in his eyes was gone. It had been replaced by a hard, cold annoyance. He had made his choice, and now he just wanted the mess to be over. He wanted me to be over. "You've caused too many problems," he said, his voice stronger, harder. "Dawn's right. You can't be here anymore. This is our house." Our house. The house I had paid $50,000 to save. The house I had bought with my own retirement, my own security. I didn't say another word. What was left to say? I had seen. I had heard. I finally, completely understood. I turned, and I started to walk, my feet crunching on the broken glass, toward my bedroom door. I had to get Henry. "Where are you going?" Robert asked, his voice suddenly panicked. "Not for me. For what Dawn would do if I stayed 1 second longer. To get my things," I said, my voice as dead as my heart. I didn't look back. "No! There's no time for that!" Dawn shrieked from the doorway. "Get her out! Get her out now, Robert!" Robert ran after me. He grabbed my elbow. It was the first time he had touched me in months, and it wasn't a touch of comfort. It was a brutal, bruising, violent grip. "Mom, just go," he said, and he started to pull me, to drag me toward the front door. "My things!" I cried, trying to pull away. My feet stumbled on the carpet. Henry's box! Robert, please, I need Henry's box. I'll I'll mail it to you, he lied, his face tight with frustration and shame. He just wanted me gone. He was pulling me, half dragging me, past the living room to the door. He fumbled with the deadbolt and yanked the door open. He let go of my arm only to reach into the pocket of his bathrobe and pull out his wallet. He fumbled through it, his hands shaking, and pulled out a small, crumpled wad of bills. He counted them quickly, angrily. Here, he said, and he shoved the money into my hand, the one that wasn't bleeding. It's $200 for you to get settled, find a place. $200 for 50,000 for a lifetime, for the rest of my life. He pushed me out into the hallway. The door was open. He was standing in the doorway, blocking me from getting back in. I had no strength left to fight. The rage was gone, evaporated, leaving behind a cold, crushing, total exhaustion. I was numb. I wasn't even wearing shoes, I realized. I had come in such a hurry, oh no. I was wearing my shoes. My mind was scattering. I looked down. Yes, my sneakers. I was standing in the apartment building hallway, in the coat I'd worn from the motel, my hand bleeding onto the industrial carpet, clutching $200. I'm sorry, Mom, Robert said again. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was already pulling out his phone. I'll call you a cab. He started tapping at the screen, his hands shaking. He wasn't saying goodbye. He wasn't making sure I was safe. He was just trying to make me disappear for his wife. Robert, I said. My voice was eerily calm. It was so calm it scared him. He looked up from his phone. I looked him dead in the eye. You will regret this. He flinched, as if I'd slapped him. His mouth opened, but before he could answer, before he could say one more lie, one more, I'm sorry, the apartment door slammed shut in my face. I heard the deadbolt slide into place. A heavy, final, metallic thunk. I stood there, alone in the hallway, no home, no family, no Henry, nothing. Just $200 and a bleeding wound on my temple. Robert didn't wait for a cab. He didn't even say another word. He just slammed the door in my face. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was like a gunshot in the quiet hallway. I stood there, shaking, in the carpeted corridor of that apartment building, wearing only my socks on my feet. No, wait. I had my sneakers. My mind was scattering. I looked down. Yes, my sneakers. The ones I'd bought at Walmart. My cheap, thin sneakers. I was shaking so hard my teeth were chattering, but it wasn't cold in the hall. 200 crumpled dollars were clutched in my right hand, the one that was still sticky and smeared with my own blood. I don't know how I made it to the elevator. I don't remember pressing the button. I don't remember walking through the lobby, past the doorman who was watching me with that strange, pitying look. I was suddenly outside, on the sidewalk, in the middle of a cold, gray afternoon, with the city noise rushing all around me. And I had nowhere to go. I was 71 years old, bleeding from the hand and the head, and I did not exist. I lifted my good hand, the one with the money, and waved weakly at a taxi. It screeched to a halt in front of me. The driver unlocked the door. "Where to, lady?" he asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. I could see his eyes linger on my bleeding temple. I couldn't answer. I had no answer. Where? Just Just drive, I whispered. Find a cheap motel, somewhere near the highway, please. He nodded, didn't ask any more questions, and the meter started to run. He dropped me off at a place called the Starlight Motel. The S in Star was burned out, and the neon just buzzed, an angry pink tar light against the dusk. $60 a night cash, the driver said helpfully. I nodded. I gave him a 20 for the ride. I had $180 left. The room smelled overpowering, a chemical stew of old cigarettes, bleach, and despair. The carpet was sticky. The bedspread had a burn hole in it, but it had a door. I paid the man at the window $60. I had 120 left. I walked into that little, foul-smelling room, and I pushed the door shut. I turned the deadbolt. I fumbled with the chain lock and slid it into place. And the second that little piece of metal clicked into its groove, my legs gave out. I didn't make it to the bed. I slid down the rough wooden door, my back scraping against it, until I was huddled on the filthy floor. And finally, after all of it, I cried. I hadn't cried in the kitchen. I hadn't cried when he shoved the money into my hand and pushed me out the door. But now, alone, in this strange, anonymous room, the dam broke. It wasn't a ladylike cry. It was an ugly, gasping animal sound. I cried for Henry. I cried for the son I thought I had, the son I had clearly lost decades ago. I cried for the stinging, throbbing pain on my temple and the deeper, burning humiliation that was eating me alive. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on that floor, shivering, until the sun came up. The next morning, I took $20 and I walked across the highway overpass to a 24-hour Walmart. I was still wearing the same clothes, now stained with my own blood. I must have looked a sight. I bought a toothbrush, a travel-sized toothpaste, a bar of soap, one pair of cheap white cotton socks, the cheapest pair of slip-on sneakers I could find, the ones with the foam soles, and a $5 t-shirt. I went into the cold, massive bathroom and I washed my face, my hands, my hair, in the sink. I changed into the new shirt. I threw my old, blood-stained things in the trash. Everything I owned in the world, my entire life, now fit into a single blue Walmart plastic bag. I felt like a thief, counting out every single penny, afraid someone would stop me and ask what I was doing. I went back to the motel. $60 for the next night. I had $40 left. I stayed in that room all day, just watching bad TV, too scared to go out. The next day, $60 again, except I didn't have $60. I went to the front desk. I only have 40, I told the man. He was a different man, this one, a hard-looking man with tired eyes. He just shook his head, not even unkindly, just blank. Sorry, Grandma, he said, not looking up from his newspaper. No money, no room. Checkout was an hour ago. He just said it. So simple, so final. I was being kicked out. I had $40 in my pocket, and it was getting dark. That night was the first night I was truly homeless. I had no roof. I had no room key. I just walked. I walked for hours. My feet, in those cheap new shoes, started to blister and swell. I found a small, dark city park. I found a bench, the kind with the wooden slats, tucked behind a big, overgrown shrub that smelled like cat pee. I sat down. I waited. And when the park was completely empty, I pulled my thin coat tight around me, balled up my plastic Walmart bag to use as a pillow, and I lay down. I did not sleep for a single second. Every noise, a siren in the distance, a snap twig roar from a car slowing down on the street, it made my heart stop. I was 71 years old. I had raised a child. I had paid taxes. I had voted in every election, and I was sleeping on a park bench. I kept thinking about Robert and Dawn. They were probably asleep, comfortable, in their nice warm bed in the apartment I had helped to save. The contrast, the sheer screaming injustice of it, it was colder than the wind blowing through the slats of that bench. I wondered, did he even think for 1 second where his mother was? Did he care if I was safe? Or did he forget me the second that deadbolt clicked? The next few days, they're a blur, a smeared, gray, hungry nightmare. This is the hardest part to talk about. You just can't understand how the world works until you become invisible. People don't just look at you and look away. They look through you, as if you're a ghost. I was just another homeless old woman, a problem nobody wanted to see, a statistic. And the fear I'd felt on that bench, it vanished. It was replaced by something else, a sharp, cold, robotic focus. My entire world, my entire mind, shrank down to 3 simple, constant questions. Where do I find water? Where do I stay warm? And where, dear God, do I sleep tonight? I learned the rules of this new life. During the day, I went to the public library. It was warm. It was safe. And the bathrooms were clean. I would sit there for hours, pretending to read a novel, but I was just staring at the words. They didn't make any sense. I was hiding among the books, just to feel the safety of 4 walls and the dignity of silence. The hunger, that's a different thing. It's a constant, gnawing, dull ache that sits in your stomach and just takes over. The $40 was gone, spent on a few bags of chips and a bottle of water. I learned very quickly that fast food restaurants near the highway throw out their unsold food around 2 p.m. after the lunch rush. And yes, I did it. I'm so ashamed to even say it. I did it. I waited. I hid behind the building, by the dumpsters. I waited until the teenage employee brought out the black plastic bags and tossed them in. I waited until he went back inside, and then I climbed into the dumpster. I'm Eliza. I used to worry about my coffee being too weak. And I was in a dumpster, tearing open a bag, my hands shaking. I was looking for anything still in its wrapper. I ate. I found a half-eaten hamburger. I found cold limp French fries. The shame at first, it was so big it felt like I was choking on it. But the hunger was bigger. I just told myself, this is temporary. You just have to live. You have to survive. I didn't know why, but I knew I couldn't let my story end here. I could not let them win by letting myself die on a dirty sidewalk. My lowest point, it came on a Tuesday, I think. It was raining, a cold, miserable, soaking rain that found its way through my thin coat and chilled me right to the bone. I hadn't eaten anything all day. My cheap Walmart shoes were soaked. My socks were wet and cold. I was done. I was so tired. And then I saw it. A long line of people standing outside an old church, under a makeshift awning, a soup kitchen, and the shame, it just rose up in me like bile. I am a decent woman. I'm a good person. I raised a son. I paid my bills. I am not I am not someone who stands in line for a handout. I stood across the street for a long time, in the dark, just watching them, watching the other invisible people. But my body betrayed my pride. My legs, they just, they started moving. They walked me across the street and they put me at the end of that line. I stood there, my head bowed, my wet hair dripping in my face, just praying no one would look at me. A young woman with tired, kind eyes handed me a hot styrofoam cup. I took it. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I hurried away from the light, back into a dark corner. The steam from the cup rose up and hit my face. I took a sip. It was a thin vegetable soup, watery, but it was the single greatest thing I had ever tasted. It was hot, and I just stood there in the rain, and the tears started to mix with the soup. I had gone from making soup for my ungrateful son in his kitchen to begging for soup on a street corner in the space of a week, from a mother to a person of no consequence. That cup of soup, it both saved my life and shattered my heart in the same second. You know, it's a funny thing. I used to spend hours browsing on Amazon or on Wayfair looking for a new set of curtains. I was thinking about buying a Lazy Boy recliner just before Henry passed. I used to complain if my Skechers weren't comfortable enough. And now, my most prized possession on earth was this hot cup of watery soup. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where you realize that all the things, all the stuff we spend our lives worrying about and accumulating, it doesn't mean anything at all? If you've ever felt that, just type "I understand" in the comments. I I really need to know I'm not alone in feeling this. I started going back to that church every night, not just for the soup, but because it was safe. There were other people like me. We didn't talk. We didn't have to. We just understood. We were the brotherhood of the invisible. One night, I was eating my soup and getting ready to head back to my park bench. The rain had stopped, but it was getting colder. A woman, an older woman in a nun's habit, gently touched my arm. She had the kindest face I had ever seen. "It's too cold for that park bench, dear," she said, her voice soft. She must have seen me there. She looked at me, not with pity, but with recognition. "That's no place for you?" She pointed to a heavy wooden door next to the main church. "We have one cot left in the temporary shelter. It's not the Ritz." She smiled, a small, sad smile. "But it is warm, and the door has a lock." That night, for the first time in almost 2 weeks, I slept on a bed. It was just a thin, plastic-covered mattress on a metal frame, in a large, gymnasium-like room with 10 other women, all of us snoring and coughing. But I was safe. The bone-deep terror of sleeping outside, of listening for footsteps, it finally, temporarily, receded. I lay there, listening to the sounds of the other women breathing in the dark, and I felt a tiny, fragile, impossibly small feeling start to come back. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was a feeling of safety. I had no idea what would happen tomorrow, but at least for tonight, I wouldn't freeze. The church shelter, even though it was just a thin mattress on a cold floor, had given me two things I hadn't had in weeks: warmth and the feeling of safety. After a few nights, Sister Margaret, seeing that I wasn't, well, seeing that I was just a woman in trouble, she let me use a small, quiet storage room during the day. It was just a place to sit, somewhere I could gather, well, my possessions, my entire life's possessions, which consisted of that single, battered old suitcase. I never did figure out how I ended up with it. Maybe in the chaos of me smashing the kitchen, Robert had just thrown it into the hall after me. Or maybe I'd grabbed it without even realizing. It didn't matter. It had been with me, a heavy, useless burden, from the Starlight Motel to the park bench. Now, under the single dim yellow bulb of that storage room, I finally opened it. The clothes inside were still damp and smelled like rain and city grit. I was just digging through them, not looking for anything, really, just hoping to find a pair of dry socks. And then my fingers brushed against something hard, something hidden beneath the torn, sagging lining at the very bottom of the case. It was a thick, old envelope, a brown leather document holder, really, one I recognized instantly. It was the envelope Henry had always used to keep his most important papers. My hands started to shake. I pulled it out. On the front, written in his familiar, sloping handwriting, was just one word: Eliza. My heart it stopped. I had completely forgotten about this. He must have hidden it there, tucked it away from me, before his last trip to the hospital. I had been carrying it this whole time, sleeping on it in the park, dragging it through the rain, and I never even knew. I clutched the envelope to my chest, just seeing his writing, that part of him, it made me burst into tears. But these were different tears, not the hot, angry tears from the kitchen or the hopeless, cold tears from the motel. These were tears of love, of just remembering. "Oh, Henry," I whispered. It felt for a second like he was right there in that cold, damp storage room with me, his hand on my shoulder. I sat right down on the concrete floor, took a deep breath, and carefully opened the flap. The letter started with words of love. He told me how much he cherished me. He wrote that he was sorry, so sorry for keeping a secret, but that he had to do it to protect me. He wrote that he knew my heart, how I would give anything to our son. But he also wrote, "I also know our son, Eliza. I love him, but he is weak, and he is easily led." And then I read the next part. "My darling Eliza," he wrote, "we are not poor. We are not poor. I've been investing my salary quietly for over 30 years. You, and you alone, are the sole beneficiary of an estate worth just over $10 million. I had to read that sentence 3 times. $10 million. The numbers just swam in front of my eyes. I couldn't understand. I thought, this must be a mistake. Maybe he was confused on his medication when he wrote this. But I kept reading. The letter was detailed. It listed bank accounts, stock portfolios, and property. "I acquired 13 properties over the years, my love," he wrote. "They are all managed by a law firm. You don't have to do a thing. The lawyer's name is Roger Mendes." I was still reeling. I couldn't breathe. $10 million? Me? Eliza? The woman who, just 3 days ago, was eating cold fries out of a dumpster? The woman who was just grateful for a cup of watery soup? The sheer insanity of it. I almost laughed. It was a hysterical, broken sound. And then I read the last line on the list of properties. An address. An address I knew. An address I recognized instantly. It was the address of the high-rise apartment building where Robert and Dawn lived. The building where I had been hit with that hot ladle. The building I had just been physically thrown out of. The apartment. The apartment I had paid $50,000 of my retirement money to save for them. It was mine. I had paid to save my own building for my own son. The letter fell out of my hands. I wasn't crying anymore. A feeling so cold and so powerful, it felt like ice water flooding my veins. It just shot right up my spine. I looked at the name and address again. Roger Mendes, Esquire. Henry hadn't just left me money. He had left me a purpose. He had left me a way out. He had left me a weapon. I stood up. I wasn't the shaking, homeless old woman anymore. I knew exactly what I had to do. The next morning at the shelter, I felt different. The ice in my veins from the night before had become a hard, sharp purpose. I found Sister Margaret in her small office, and I asked if I could please use her phone. My hands were shaking, but not from fear or cold. It was anticipation. I dialed the number for Roger Mendes, Esquire, the name written so clearly in Henry's steady hand. I expected to get a machine, a secretary, a voicemail. I was ready to leave a rambling, desperate message, but a voice answered on the second ring. A woman's voice, crisp and professional. Mendes Law. How may I help you? I almost couldn't speak. My throat had closed up. Yes. Hello. My name is Eliza, I stammered, my voice sounding weak and thin. I'm Henry's wife, and he left me a letter. There was a half-second of silence on the other end, and then the entire energy of the call changed. The professional chill vanished, replaced by a sudden startling warmth. Mrs. Eliza, oh my goodness. Please hold one moment. Mr. Mendes has been, well, he has been waiting for your call for a very long time. I heard a soft click, and then a man's voice, deep and calm and full of authority, came on the line. Mrs. Eliza, this is Roger Mendes. Your husband was a dear, dear friend of mine for 30 years. Where are you? Are you safe? For the first time since Henry died, for the first time in weeks of terror and humiliation, I felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees. I wasn't alone in this. Yes, I'm safe. I'm at a church shelter, I whispered. He didn't ask me to explain. He didn't ask what happened. He just asked for the address, and then he said, "Stay right there. A car will be there for you in 15 minutes. Don't move." It wasn't a taxi. It was a large, black, gleaming Lincoln Town car. A driver in a black suit got out, walked around, and opened the back door for me. "Mrs. Eliza?" he asked, his voice respectful. I just nodded. Me, in my $5 t-shirt and my cheap foam-soled Walmart shoes, my hair still matted, I slid onto the soft, cool leather seat. The car was silent inside, gliding through the city streets that I had just been sleeping on. It pulled up to a tall, shining glass building downtown. The driver opened my door. "Mr. Mendes' office is on the top floor," he said. I walked into the lobby. The walls were all polished black marble, and as I walked toward the elevator, I caught my reflection. I saw a homeless woman, a gaunt, hollow-eyed, terrified old woman with greasy wild hair and clothes that hung on her bony frame. I almost turned and ran, but just then the elevator doors opened and Roger Mendes himself was stepping out. He was an older man, tall, with kind eyes and a sharp suit. He didn't even blink. He didn't show a flicker of surprise or disgust. He just walked right up to me, his hand outstretched, and he took my hand, the one that was still scabbed and bruised, in both of his. "Mrs. Eliza, it is a true honor to finally meet you," he said, his voice full of genuine warmth. "Henry spoke of you endlessly. You are exactly as he described. Come, please. We have a great deal of work to do." He treated me like a queen. In his office, high above the city, he handed me a cup of hot, sweet tea. My hands were still shaking, and the porcelain cup rattled against the saucer. He gently, patiently began to explain. Everything Henry wrote was true. Henry was a brilliant, and very quiet investor, Roger explained, his voice soft. He created Mendoza Enterprises decades ago as a holding company to manage his assets. He loved the name. Your maiden name, I believe? I nodded, stunned. "And you, Eliza, you are the sole owner, the sole director, everything. It is all yours." He pushed a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the desk. "This is the most recent financial statement. The $10 million he quoted you, that was a very conservative estimate. The portfolio has done quite well." He explained the 13 properties, the stocks, the bonds, and then he paused, his expression turning sad. "There is one other matter, Eliza. The building your son lives in. Henry left a very specific instruction in his file for me. Your son, Robert, was to be granted a lifetime lease at a special that family rate, $400 a month, as long as he was living there." Roger looked at me, his eyes full of understanding. Henry's hope was that, well, his hope was that this arrangement would free Robert to take proper care of you. I take it, given the circumstances under which I found you, that did not happen. I didn't have to say a word. I just looked at my bruised hands. I just shook my head. He nodded, a slow, sad acknowledgement. "Right," Roger said, his tone suddenly brisk. "All business. The first thing we must do is get you out of this situation. Immediately." He picked up his phone. He made 2 calls. Within 1 hour, I had a new private bank account opened in my name at his bank. A corporate American Express card in the name of Eliza Mendoza, President, Mendoza Enterprises, was being messengered to me, and a reservation had been made for a 1-bedroom suite at the Four Seasons Hotel. "You will stay there as my guest until we find you a permanent, secure residence," he said. The first thing I did when I got to that beautiful hotel room was walk into the marble bathroom. I turned on the hot water in the enormous bathtub. I locked the door, and I soaked in that tub for 2 hours. I just sat and watched the gray, dirty water. I watched the weeks of grime and filth and sleeping on park benches and digging through trash. I watched it all just wash away. And as the water drained, I felt like I was washing away not just the dirt, but the shame. I was washing away the invisible woman. The next day, I did not go looking for revenge. I went looking for myself. I went to a real hair salon. The woman was so kind. She washed and cut my hair, and I felt human. Then I went shopping. I didn't go to Gucci. I didn't go to those flashy stores. I went to Talbot's, and I went to Chico's. The stores I had always walked past, thinking they were a little too expensive for me. I bought beautiful soft linen slacks. I bought soft cotton sweaters and silk blouses. I bought real supportive, comfortable shoes from Clark's. I bought new luggage. I paid with my new credit card. When I walked back to the hotel and looked in the mirror, I didn't see the homeless woman. I didn't even see the sad, invisible woman from Robert's apartment. I saw Eliza Mendoza. She was older. She was tired, but she was strong. The next step was safety, security. I took the old, cheap cell phone I'd had, the one Robert and Dawn used to call, the one I had been staring at for weeks, and I dropped it into a public trash can. It was gone. All the phantom calls, all the fake apologies I was half expecting, all the insults from Dawn, they were gone with it. Roger's office had a new, encrypted cell phone delivered to me. A new number. "Only you and I have this number, Eliza," he assured me. He also found me a place. A beautiful, high-end, fully furnished corporate apartment. A place no one knew about. An unlisted address. That night I slept in my own bed. For the first time I had my own locks. I had my own security system, one that I controlled. The feeling of safety, it came back slowly, but it was real. I didn't have to sleep with one eye open. I didn't have to worry about the rain or about someone stealing my shoes. I realized then what true wealth is. It's not the $10 million. It's not the fancy apartment. It's peace. It's the right to lock your own door and know with absolute certainty that no one can get in and hurt you. After a week of healing, of eating 3 good meals a day, of just sleeping, I went back to Roger's office. I was ready. "Eliza, we need to discuss the building," he said, pulling out a file. "Robert's $400 a month lease. It's a month-to-month tenancy, per Henry's instructions." He pushed a piece of paper toward me. It was a rent roll for the building. "I've had my people run the numbers. The current market rate for a 2-bedroom apartment in that building is $2,500 a month. The difference? It was staggering. $2,100. They had been living in luxury, subsidized by Henry's love, while I, the actual owner, was begging for soup. "Henry left the final discretion to you, Eliza," Roger said gently. "In the event of, well, in this event, we can leave the rent as it is, or, as the owners of Mendoza Enterprises, we can change it." I looked at the contract, I looked at the numbers, and I thought about the hot, searing pain of that metal ladle on my temple. I thought about the sound of that football game getting louder. I thought about the 20 crumpled, dirty bills Robert had shoved into my bleeding hand. I wasn't angry. The hot, explosive rage from that kitchen was gone. I just felt a cold, clear, absolute certainty. This wasn't revenge. I wasn't Dawn, smashing things in a rage. This was business. This was justice. "Mr. Mendes," I said. My voice was new. It was steady. It was strong. "I would like Mendoza Enterprises to send out new lease agreements to all tenants in that building, effective immediately, adjusting all rents to their current fair market value." I looked him right in the eye. No exceptions. Roger Mendes held my gaze for a moment, and then he smiled, a small, satisfied smile. "As you wish, Mrs. Mendoza. The 30-day rent increase notices will be delivered tomorrow morning, effective the 1st of next month." I nodded. I took the pen he offered me, and I signed the authorization paper. The game had changed, and this time I was the one holding the rules. The rent increase notices had been sent. I had done it. Sitting in my safe, quiet service apartment, I kept trying to figure out how I felt. I thought I would feel a sense of triumph, or at least not dark, some grim satisfaction. But mostly, I just felt empty and a little anxious. Roger had confirmed the notices were all legally served. Now, it was just a waiting game. I knew Robert and Dawn had received theirs. I wondered what their reaction was. Would they call Mendoza Enterprises and scream at a secretary? Would they try to call me? Oh, no, they couldn't. I had cut that cord. I tried to push them out of my head. I made a cup of tea, sat by the window, and tried to read a book, but my mind just kept circling. Had I done the right thing? A few days later, Roger called me. "Mrs. Eliza, the complaints are rolling in," he said, his voice calm and professional. "It's all just as we expected, mostly from tenants who can afford the increase but simply don't want to. However, there is one exception." He paused. "A handwritten letter from a tenant named Martha Gomez in apartment 4B. I think you should read this one." That afternoon, a scan of the letter was in my email. The handwriting was neat, careful, on a simple piece of notebook paper. The letter wasn't angry at all. It was respectful. She wrote that she understood that the cost of everything was going up. She explained that she was a nurse, a single mother of 2 small children, working the night shift at St. Jude's Hospital. She wrote, "Mr. Mendoza, sir, this sudden increase, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm just asking for more time." I must have read that letter 20 times. Martha Gomez. I remembered her. Yes, a quiet young woman, always smiled at me in the hallway, even when I was just old Eliza, the invisible woman. Her children were always polite, always said hello. She was a good person, a person who was genuinely, quietly, struggling to get by, just like I had been, only a few weeks ago. My anger, my fight, it was with Robert and Dawn. It was never with Martha. This power, this money, what was the point of any of it if it turned me into someone like Dawn? Someone willing to step on a good person just to get what I wanted? I had not fought my way out from under one abuser just to become another one. I picked up my phone and called Roger. "Mr. Mendes," I said, "about the letter from Miss Gomez." "Yes, Mrs. Mendoza?" "I want you to draw up a new lease for her," I said, and my voice was perfectly steady. "Keep her rent exactly as it is, and I want you to guarantee her, in writing, that the rate will not increase for at least the next 3 years. Henry would have wanted that." I could hear the smile in Roger's voice over the phone. "I believe he would have too, Mrs. Mendoza. I will take care of it immediately." When I hung up the phone, that empty, anxious feeling was gone. For the first time, I felt like I was truly and rightfully in control. This wasn't about revenge. This was about setting things right. That evening, I got another email from Roger. It was short. Miss Gomez called the office. She was in tears. She said that Mendoza Enterprises had just saved her family and to please pass on her deepest, deepest gratitude to the owner. I smiled. I wasn't alone in that building anymore. I had an ally, and I knew when the time came, Martha Gomez would be someone who stood on the side of the truth. Just as we expected, Only 2 days after the rent increase notices were delivered, Roger's office began to field the angry calls, and the loudest, Roger told me, was from Robert. He was colorful, Roger recounted, his voice perfectly calm over the phone. He called Mendoza Enterprises a bunch of crooks. He claimed he had a special arrangement with the previous owner. Roger, in his wonderfully unflappable professional way, had politely informed my son that the previous owner, Henry, was deceased, and that any verbal arrangements or special deals had died with him. His lease was, and always had been, a month-to-month tenancy, and the company was well within its rights to adjust the rent to fair market value. He threatened to sue, Roger added, as a final note. I was sitting in my new, safe apartment, looking out over the city. I only asked one question. Does he have any legal standing? Absolutely none, Roger replied. He's just, I believe the expression is, angry that the free party is over. I thanked him and hung up. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel happy. I just felt a sense of correctness, of a scale being balanced. I spent the next few days doing what I should have done a long time ago. I started to learn my own business. Roger had binders and digital files delivered to me, all 13 properties. I sat with a pot of tea and a yellow legal pad, and I read. I learned about my assets. I read the commercial tenant lists, the law firms, the dental practices, the consulting companies. And that's when I saw a name. A tenant in my Pine Street commercial building. FinTech Solutions. The name was familiar. I couldn't place it at first, and then it hit me. When I was first trying to understand my abusers, I had looked them up online. Dawn's public LinkedIn profile. She worked as an independent consultant, and her largest, most bragged about client, the one that took up most of her professional page, was FinTech Solutions. My heart didn't race. It just settled. It became very still. My daughter-in-law, the woman who had struck me, was an independent contractor. Her biggest client, the one that I knew paid for her expensive car and her shopping habits, was a tenant. My tenant. I looked at the two names, Dawn and FinTech, on my desk, and a plan, a very clear, simple business plan began to form. I called Roger. Mr. Mendes, I'm looking at the Pine Street property files, I said, my voice all business. The lease for FinTech Solutions. What is its status? I heard a brief rustle of papers on his end. Yes. Here we are. Their 5-year lease is due for renewal in 60 days. We were just preparing to send them a standard renewal offer. We won't be sending the standard offer, I said. I want you to run a full market analysis for that entire district. I want to know the highest, most aggressive, legally justifiable rate the market will bear for a Class A office space like theirs. And I want you to send them that as the new contract. A significant increase. There was a silence on the other end. Not of disapproval, but perhaps of surprise. Mrs. Mendoza, Roger said carefully, that is a very decisive move. An increase of that size. We risk them walking. They could leave. They won't walk, I said, with a certainty that surprised even myself. Relocating an entire corporate office, the logistics, the cost, the downtime, it's far more expensive than accepting a rent increase, even a steep one. They'll have to cut their operational costs somewhere else to absorb it. Please, Mr. Mendes, do it. I heard that small, satisfied smile in his voice again. As you wish, Mrs. Mendoza. I'll have the new contract drawn up today. Just as I had predicted. 3 weeks later, Roger reported that FinTech Solutions had, in his words, complained bitterly, but had ultimately signed the new 5-year lease at the much higher rate. They were locked in. I nodded, thanked him, and I waited. I didn't have to wait long. About a week later, I was just browsing the local business journal online, and I saw a small press release. FinTech Solutions was announcing a strategic restructuring to meet rising operational costs. And as part of that restructuring, they were streamlining their external consulting contracts. The next day, Roger confirmed it through his own channels. It appears your daughter-in-law's primary contract was not renewed, he said. And there it was. I hadn't called her. I hadn't yelled at her. I hadn't done anything to her. I had simply run my business. Dawn, the woman who had hit me over a pot of soup, had just lost her main source of income. That was the killing blow. A household that was, as I now knew, barely surviving on 2 incomes, was suddenly down to 1. And that was the exact same moment that their largest, most essential living expense, their rent, had just increased from $400 to $2,500. The math was simple, it was brutal, and it was impossible. The first of the new month came. I waited. At 10 a.m., I got the email from Roger's office. Payment for apartment 12B has not been received. 5 days later, a formal legal pay or quit notice was delivered to their door, an eviction warning, and then, in the middle of the month, the security camera feed for the building lobby, which, as Mendoza Enterprises, I now had full access to, showed me everything I needed to know. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The camera showed the elevator doors opening. Dawn emerged, pulling 2 very large, very expensive suitcases. She was dressed for travel. She did not look upset. She looked angry, determined. She stalked across the lobby, did not look back, and pushed her way out the front door. I watched from another camera as she loaded her bags into an Uber Black, and she was gone. She had left him. The woman who had given Robert the ultimatum, choose me or her, had now, faced with her own ultimatum of poverty, abandoned him. Her loyalty, just like their love, was entirely transactional. Robert, he was now alone. He was, as Roger soon found out, also unemployed, having lost his own job due to the stress. He was alone, broke, and facing imminent eviction from his own mother's property. The foundation had cracked. The whole house was coming down. After Dawn left, with her 2 expensive suitcases and her Uber Black, Robert completely fell apart. He was now 2 months behind on rent. Mendoza Enterprises, acting on my precise instructions, followed every single legal procedure by the book. There would be no mistakes. The formal pay or quit notice was legally served. And when that deadline passed, just as I knew it would, with no payment, we took the next step. A formal unlawful detainer, an eviction lawsuit, was filed with the Superior Court. A court date was officially set. This was no longer a messy family argument. This was the law. I, Eliza Mendoza, president of Mendoza Enterprises, was formally suing my son Robert to reclaim my property. The court summons was served. A process server taped the official notice to his apartment door, number 12B, the door I had paid for, the door he had slammed in my face. There was no going back now. That, That is when Robert's true animal panic began. Roger's office was suddenly bombarded. "He's calling Mrs. Mendoza dozens of times a day," Roger reported to me, his voice still as calm as a placid lake. "He's no longer screaming. He's begging." Robert was desperate, apparently, to speak to the owner, to Mr. Mendoza. He was telling the secretaries it was all a terrible, terrible misunderstanding, that he could explain everything. He was babbling that he lived there for years, that the previous owner was his family. Roger, following my strict instructions, politely declined every call and every request for a meeting. He had his assistant inform Robert that, as this was now an active legal matter, all future communications must be made through his legal counsel. The truth, of course, the bitter, beautiful irony, was that Robert didn't have legal counsel. He couldn't afford one. He was just a single, unemployed, broke man, completely alone, about to be thrown out onto the street. He was, in every single way, in the exact same position he had put me in. Then, 1 week before the court date, something new happened. Roger received a call from an attorney. "Not a large firm," Roger explained to me. "It appears to be a legal aid lawyer. Mr. Robert finally found representation." This lawyer, who Roger said sounded like a reasonable person, was trying to negotiate. He had probably, and generously, taken Robert's case out of pity. "They want to discuss a settlement," Roger said. "This attorney, he seems to believe his client is just a man going through a terribly difficult time. He cited the loss of his job, his recent, divorce." I was silent, just listening. I wondered, just for a moment, what story Robert had told that lawyer. Did he tell him about his hard time? Did he tell him about his mother, sleeping on a park bench? Did he tell him about the hot metal ladle? Did he tell him about the sound of the football game? Or was he once again the victim? "Here is their official offer," Roger continued, his voice carefully neutral. "If Mendoza Enterprises agrees to forgive the entire amount of back rent owed, which is now approximately $5,000, and if we also agree to pay Mr. Robert a sum of $1,000 for his relocation costs, he will agree to voluntarily vacate the premises within 30 days, and we can all avoid the court hearing." I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was dry. It was hollow. It was a single, sharp ha. He didn't just want the $50,000 apartment for free. He didn't just want the $5,000 of debt erased. He wanted me to pay him $1,000 to leave my own building. He still believed, after all of this, that he was the one who was owed something. He still thought he was the victim. He had learned his lessons from Dawn so well. He had learned them from me, from all the years I had simply given in. He was still trying to manipulate, still trying to get his allowance, even now. He had no idea who he was dealing with. "Mr. Mendes," I said, and my voice had no doubt, no hesitation, not a single tremor. "The answer is no. We refuse all compromise. We will see him in court." There was a brief pause on the line. I heard Roger let out a small breath. "Understood, Mrs. Mendoza," he replied. "The hearing is set. Tuesday, 10 o'clock a.m. We are fully prepared." When I hung up the phone, the tension I'd been holding in my shoulders, the last little bit of anxiety about the coming fight, it all just evaporated. It was replaced by a strange, cold, and total peace. I was ready. I looked across my safe, beautiful living room at the small, dark wooden box, Henry's box. Roger's people had quietly, legally retrieved it, along with my few other boxes of personal belongings, from the apartment after Dawn had left and it was legally determined to be partially abandoned. I walked over and opened it. I looked at the old photos. I didn't need the legal contracts. I didn't need the rent rolls. The only evidence I truly needed was my story. And on Tuesday, for the very first time in his life, Robert was going to be forced to listen to it. That day, I woke up before the sun. I wasn't nervous. I was calm, very, very calm. I chose my clothes with care, not a power suit, not something flashy, just a simple dark navy blue dress. It was professional. It was respectable. It was the armor I needed. Roger picked me up himself, and we drove to the courthouse in silence. It wasn't a grand marble-columned building like you see on TV. It was the county civil courthouse, the place where evictions and small claims are handled. The air inside was heavy. It smelled like stale coffee, anxiety, and desperation. The hallways were filled with people, all of them looking tired, scared, waiting for a judge to decide their fate. We entered the assigned courtroom. It was small, functional, and packed. And then I saw him, Robert. He was sitting in the front row, huddled next to a tired-looking man in a rumpled suit, his legal aid lawyer. My son, he looked pathetic. He hadn't shaved in days. His old suit, one I remembered him buying for a job interview years ago, was wrinkled and hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight. He kept running a shaking hand over his face, his knee bouncing a mile a minute. He looked like a man who had been completely hollowed out. He was staring at the floor, lost in his own miserable world. He didn't see me come in. "All rise," the bailiff called out, his voice booming in the small room. We stood. The judge entered. She was a woman, perhaps in her late 50s, with sharp eyes and an expression that said she had heard every lie in the book and was thoroughly tired of it. She sat, and the cattle call of human misery began. She moved through the calendar with a rapid, no-nonsense efficiency. Case 203, judgment for the plaintiff. Case 204, eviction stayed, pay the back rent. Case 205, Mendoza Enterprises versus Robert. My son's name, his name, hanging in the air. "Counsel, please approach," the judge said, sounding bored. Roger stood, buttoning his jacket. He placed a hand on my back and guided me. "We're ready, Eliza," he whispered. We walked up and took our place at the plaintiff's table. On the other side, Robert and his lawyer stood and walked to the defendant's table. And that is when he looked up. His eyes, full of fear and confusion, scanned the room. They slid past Roger, and then they found me. The entire world just stopped. All the color drained from Robert's face. He froze, his body rigid. I could see the confusion, the sheer, uncomprehending shock. He blinked, once, twice, as if his brain just could not process what his eyes were seeing. His mother, the mother he had hit, the mother he had thrown out onto the street, sitting at the other table, sitting next to the lawyer for Mendoza Enterprises. I could see the gears turning, the panic rising. It still hadn't clicked. He turned, his eyes wide, and whispered frantically to his lawyer. The lawyer, looking just as confused, just shrugged his shoulders. Robert was alone. "We're here on the matter of an unlawful detainer," the judge said, looking at the file. "Defendant's counsel, you filed a motion to delay, claiming the rent increase was unconscionable?" Robert's legal aid lawyer stood up. He did his best. He painted a very sad, very compelling story, and most of it was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. He talked about Robert being a long-time stable tenant. He spoke of my son's recent painful divorce. He mentioned the unexpected corporate restructuring that had led to his unemployment. He portrayed Robert as a man trying his best to get back on his feet, and that this sudden, predatory rent increase from $400 to $2,500 was inhumane, designed only to force out a good man in his time of need. Robert sat there, nodding along, his face a mask of sorrow. He was good. He was actually trying to squeeze out a few tears. He was the perfect victim, a decent man being bullied by a faceless, heartless corporation. He was pleading with the judge, through his lawyer, for more time, for a chance, for mercy. I just sat there. I kept my hands folded, one on top of the other, on the cool, polished wood of the table. The judge looked over at our table. Plaintiff's counsel? A response to this claim of inhumane action? Roger stood up. He was a picture of calm, respectful professionalism. He didn't talk about the divorce. He didn't talk about the job loss. He only talked about the facts. "Sir," he said, addressing Robert directly, "is it true you were on a month-to-month lease agreement?" Robert looked at his lawyer, who nodded. "Yes, but is it true," Roger continued, "that the previous owner of the building, Mr. Henry, is deceased?" "Yes." "Is it true you received a legal 30-day written notice of the rent adjustment to the current market rate?" "Yes, I got it, but it's too high. It's impossible." Robert was getting agitated. "And finally," Roger's voice became sharp, cutting through the room, "Mr. Robert, for the past 3 months, have you paid any rent at all? Not the new rate, not the old rate. Have you paid anything?" The air in the courtroom went completely still. Robert, who had been leaning forward, just deflated. He sank back in his chair. He looked down at his hands. "No," he whispered. "I'm sorry, sir, the court can't hear you," Roger pressed. "No!" Robert suddenly shouted, his voice cracking with anger and shame. "No, I couldn't pay." "No further questions, Your Honor," Roger said, and calmly sat down. The judge looked at Robert, and her face was not impressed. "Sir, I'm finding it very hard to see a legal defense here. You admit you haven't paid. The defendant claims the increase was inhumane. Plaintiff, do you have a response?" Roger stood up once more. "Your Honor, the plaintiff, Mendoza Enterprises, would like to call a single witness to provide context for this business decision. We call Mrs. Eliza Mendoza." Silence. Complete, total silence. Robert's head snapped up, his face now a sheet of white paper. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. His lawyer, blindsided, jumped to his feet. "Objection! Objection, Your Honor! Irrelevant! Who is this? What is her relevance to Mendoza Enterprises?" Roger smiled. A small, sad, polite smile. "She's the owner, counsel. She is Mendoza Enterprises." A gasp went through the room. Robert looked like he was going to be sick. He was staring at me, his mouth open, his eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. The judge banged her gavel. "Order! Order! Objection is overruled. The owner may take the stand." I stood. My legs were steady. I walked past Robert. I could smell the fear on him. I walked up to the witness box. I placed my hand on the Bible. I swore the oath. I sat down. "Mrs. Mendoza," Roger began, Do you know the defendant, Mr. Robert? I turned and I looked at my son, my only child. Yes, I said, my voice clear and strong, echoing in the quiet room. He is my son. Another wave of murmurs. The judge banged her gavel again, harder this time. Quiet in my courtroom, or I'll clear it. Mrs. Mendoza, Roger continued, can you please tell the court why Mendoza Enterprises, your company, chose to terminate Mr. Roberts' special $400 a month arrangement? And I told them. I told them everything. I told them about Henry's death. I told them about my savings running out. I told them about moving in with my son. I told them about being treated like an unpaid invisible servant. And then I told them about that day. I was in the kitchen, I said, my voice steady, not a tremor in it. I was making chicken soup for my son. I looked at Robert. He was shaking his head, his eyes squeezed shut. My daughter-in-law, his wife, became angry. She grabbed the hot metal soup ladle from my hand, and she struck me in the head with it. Objection! Robert's lawyer was up again, but he looked sick. This is hearsay. It's prejudicial. The judge just raised a hand, silencing him. Her eyes locked on me. Continue, Mrs. Mendoza, she said, her voice soft now. I continued. I screamed. I was bleeding, Your Honor. And my son Robert, he was sitting in the living room, not 10 feet away. He heard everything. Robert was rocking back and forth now, muttering, No, no. It's a lie. It's a lie. And what did he do, Mrs. Mendoza? Roger asked. When he heard his mother scream? I turned and I locked eyes with my son for the last time. He turned up the volume on the television, I said. He turned up the sound on the football game to drown out the sound of my screaming. Robert he just broke. He let out a low animal wail and collapsed, folding in on himself, his head buried in his arms on the defendant's table. His whole body was shaking with sobs. He chose his wife, I said, speaking now to the judge. And then he threw me out. He threw me out of my own home in my stocking feet with $200 in my hand. I looked back at the sobbing shape of my son. You are a coward, Robert, I said, not to the judge, but to him. It was easier to sacrifice me than to risk your marriage. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Even the legal aid lawyer was just staring at his client's back with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. The judge? She took off her glasses. She pinched the bridge of her nose. I saw her wipe at her eye. She put her glasses back on and she looked at Robert, who was still just a crumpled heap. Mr. Robert, she said, and her voice was ice. You come into this courtroom, my courtroom. You ask for mercy. You speak of inhumane treatment. But the actions you took against your own mother, that is the very definition of inhumanity. She then turned to me, and her face was full of a sadness that it broke me. Mrs. Mendoza, she said, no words. I am so sorry for what you have endured. She banged her gavel. One hard, final crack. Judgment for the plaintiff, Mendoza Enterprises. The eviction is granted, effective immediately. The defendant will vacate the premises within 24 hours. She looked at Robert one last time. And Mr. Robert, I strongly suggest you get help. All rise. We stood. The judge left the bench. I stood up from the witness box, and Roger was there, and he just took my hand. The adrenaline was gone. The anger was gone. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I just felt light. The world is off my shoulders light. It was finally over. Justice had been done. It's been a year since that day in court. I don't live in that city anymore. With Roger's help, I sold all 13 of those properties, including the apartment building Robert used to live in. I didn't want to keep anything that reminded me of that past. I took the money and I moved far, far away to a quiet little coastal town in Florida, right near my old friend Brenda. I bought a small white house with a picket fence and a garden where I can just see the ocean. I'm not Mrs. Mendoza or Eliza the victim. I'm just Eliza. I wake up every morning to the sound of the ocean, not to screaming or a loud TV. I make myself a pot of coffee, just as strong as I like it, and I sit on my porch and read. The peace. It is so precious. I heard Robert is trying to get his life back together, working at a hardware store. I truly hope he finds his own peace, but that's his path. My path is right here, in my garden. I've always wanted to grow things, and now I spend my afternoons with my roses and my tomato plants. Henry would have loved it here. Sometimes, Brenda and I take a yoga class on the beach. Next week, we're planning a cruise to the Caribbean, something I've always dreamed of doing. You know, we spend so much of our lives taking care of others, we forget how to take care of ourselves. What about you? Is there a trip or a hobby, like gardening, or a class you've always dreamed of? Comment my dream and share it. It took me 71 years to learn it, but I finally understand. Your value isn't decided by how much other people need you. It's decided by how much you treasure yourself. And today, I feel completely whole.